Like if your conflict avoidance is really high, I don't want to sit in the room with people who are mad at me and have the conversation and maintain the relationship. I'd rather just go over there, make a decision. I'll eat my 65 hours and I'm good for some cheese and crackers.
I'm Anna.
I'm Darcy.
And I'm Leanne, and we're here to discuss court cases because they teach us how to effectively run special education.
And I'm Stefan. I work in general education, and I'm here to get sped-splained too.
Okay, so I have a case out of Shoreline School District, and it involves lots of elements like ESY and predetermination and COVID and all what I see.
I knew what, I mean, COVID feels like a layup, but like I knew what those other ones were. So
You did? You know what predetermination is?
Yes, because we talked about that. Let me just make sure that I'm on the right page.
Yes,
It's come up
please.
before. It's when you go into like an IEP meeting and the team has essentially made a decision already in their minds before going to the meeting, like not involving the parents or like other members of the team. Does
Gold
that make sense?
star.
I
That
definitely
is solid.
expected you to just use the word within the term, like, and then they predetermine what the service is. That's absolutely what I was
of
expecting.
little faith. What are you gonna do? And I'm evolving. I'm growing. I can't be stopped. All right, but that was right. That's the main
Yeah,
idea.
I love
All right.
it. We're obviously educators here. We educated you, and you've got it.
Yes.
And that was our post test, and you passed.
That's what that was. She's like, I've actually got a different topic. That was just us testing you. It does help. It lends a lot of credence to like the revisiting information and repetitions being a crucial part of learning, because I'm not sure if I really would have been able to pull that one out if I wasn't sitting here listening to all of our conversations again after we go through them. But that definitely helps. So, all right, predetermination, ESY, which is extended school year, and then COVID, which was just a fun period in everybody's life.
Yeah, and it impacted the student like it did many. And so we'll start from the beginning. When this male student was in sixth grade, he was found to have a specific learning disability in the area of math calculation, which is just a teeny tiny little disability in the realm of disabilities. But still required specially designed instruction. And so they were serving him in a co-teach model. In the beginning, in seventh grade, he made good progress. And then in 2020, the school made a decision to go to a 3x3 model, which I hadn't really heard that term before. But basically, they reduced the 6-class schedule down to 3 classes at a time, and they would only do 3 for a semester and then the next 3, which
In
meant
middle school?
Yeah, middle and high. Yeah, for this district.
Oh man, I've seen that in high school. That that's an interesting decision in a middle school.
Yeah. Well, and what that does is that's a gen ed decision, obviously, but it impacts every student's IEPs. So then you have to go through and decide if you're going to individually, determine their services, or if some districts might make the mistake of just going, we're going to blanket do it this way, and that wouldn't be individualized.
Can I ask
Yeah,
a question
sure.
unrelated to the spread part? I don't think I understand as much like having a schedule. Like Stephanie, you said that's an interesting decision for middle school. Why?
I guess I've just never this okay, so there's no research or anything behind this. It's just as a former middle school teacher, I there's so much a part of the middle school experience is like relationships and prepping students for like kind of what comes next. Not that high school or elementary school isn't, but middle school is such a jungle that I see reducing the amount of teachers that they come across in a given semester as tricky, just interesting. I wonder what that does to relationships with
I would think that
students
makes it easier to build a relationship because you spend more time with that teacher.
because you're with them longer. And there's
I
some,
mean, this was
If
COVID too, so nothing was going to be a great solution.
oh, I forgot
You
COVID.
know,
When I've seen middle
um,
oh, I
schools go
forgot the
like
COVID
modified
piece.
block schedules,
Did they
I was
do
on,
it?
oh, go ahead.
Did they do it because of COVID? And it was
yes,
they built a cohort. You can come,
yes,
but you don't get contact
Okay.
with any of these other kids.
I missed
So it
that.
yes.
wasn't like we picked this because we think this is
Oh.
good educationally overall, but
No.
COVID said, this is the only choice you guys get for access.
That
I
makes
could
Yeah,
have
I don't.
put that together. I just am not,
me
I'm
too.
not growing. I'm not evolving. I'm not getting smarter.
And so,
So,
Leanne, you're pulling it back into like for an IEP though, that makes it challenging because now if they're right, like for ELA or whatever, they're either 33% sped or nothing.
yeah, I think you're thinking LRE, they'd be 33% at sped, but this was like, they're not even getting access to core math instruction when they're not in that three,
And
right? So,
this kid had one, you said it was math calculation.
yes.
Yeah. And so if he's not getting math at all until second semester or whenever he would be getting that, I can see that big problem. Okay. Thank you for connecting the dots on that one.
And I mean, this does happen outside of COVID when our students get into high school and they've met all their math credits and they still qualify in the area of math, but they're not enrolled in any gen ed time with math. I mean, so it's not something that we don't experience, but this was very specific. They actually kept some of this specially designed instruction in a special ed setting for math, but they couldn't have any gen ed minutes, which they had on the IEP before. And so the family didn't like that, um, but went along with business. And then they started getting some tutoring from a Brightmont Academy for math instruction. So um, the student was attending there. And we had talked about in another case that then the family felt very unhappy with having to go to another provider for the math and maybe got in contact with an attorney, and the attorney might have mentioned you could ask for reimbursement of tuition. And during that, they also ended up requesting an IEE because they brought up concerns that this student has anxiety. It's not just that he can't do math calculation, he actually gets extremely anxious with anything to do with math because of his just not having any confidence in his work. And it really impacted him when they're in this group Zoom situation during COVID, too. The data that they do have, the district does have, showed regression. But then the teachers, when they went to due process, some of them were saying that those iReady scores aren't very valid because a lot of our students will test 2 years below their grade in iReady, and it doesn't mean that they're 2 years below their grade. So a lot of arguing about what data is good data. But that would not count, by the way, as special ed data. So I don't it doesn't come right out and say there wasn't good progress monitoring, but there was clearly not good progress monitoring.
I like
Do you
that
So
think
school approach too. Is like we collect iReady data. It's really important to us. We pay for the program and we make all the kids do it. So don't worry that it's invalid.
I could have predicted you saying that, Darcy. There's nothing like going in there and saying, yeah, this testing we put your kid through means nothing.
do you
Causes
think
him anxiety, but means nothing.
do you think the do you get the sense that the progress monitoring or lack thereof was a result of COVID, or is that like indicative of practices maybe pre-COVID?
I think it was going on along the whole way. Like they were somewhat happy with the seventh grade model, but it didn't. The data that I saw, because this has a lot in there, was very narrative and not numbers. And we need to show, graphable progress. So the family requests an IEE and the district grants it, but then dad calls back and says, I want social emotional added to the IEE. And the district says, well, you can't because we never tested social emotional, so you can't dispute that and now have us pay for it. How do you think the court found on that, guys? Because that was a new learning for me.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the WAC say they have to disagree with something. And what is there to disagree with if the school hasn't done anything? I think they have to give the school the opportunity to do something first.
That was my belief too, 100%. Not the way it turned out.
So
The
they're already doing an IEE, and family is saying we also want to add social emotional.
yeah.
Hmm. I mean, I would have
So
Did
thought
they
the same
grant
with
it
you
to him
guys.
just to give it to him?
I don't know if I would say that. They granted it to him saying, hey, if you say that you get a comprehensive eval, you get a comprehensive eval. And there was
Oh,
no reason to then say, but we get to reeval first, and then you can get the IEE for social emotional. Just do it.
And
So,
if
I
they're,
mean,
I could see if they're also getting it all done at like the same place. Like we did another case where they got like two separate IEEs and from two separate places, but one was social emotional, one was academics or something. But if you're doing it all the
Mm.
same place, it makes sense to me just to lump it all in.
And I think Darcy and I both, if we were in the director's seat, would be like, sure,
yeah, I
we're
would
going
have
to end up
definitely
in
said
a,
yes to that.
yeah,
That's like,
we're going to end up in an IEE for social emotional too. Like, even if the district
Mhm.
gets to test it first, they're going to want it because the family is clearly saying, we don't trust the district at this point. We want a second opinion. Might as well just do it, get the whole comprehensive thing done. So that was one piece of it too. But then when they get to court and they're really going through the lack of progress monitoring, and then the IEE showing that the student actually had a generalized anxiety disorder, and then the regression pieces, this case did not go the district's way.
Mm.
They definitely missed some pieces there. Like when you get an IEE, when you get those results back, the team has to sit down and consider all the findings. And they never did include anything in the IEP that addressed the anxiety piece or the social emotional needs of the student.
That just seems like a poor decision. Like, why would you, after going through the back and forth of getting an IEE, why would you not just add it in?
I know. And it could have even been accommodations. Like it didn't necessarily have to be direct services, but it was never mentioned anywhere in the IEP that the student was having um, a lot of anxiety around math. Now the school says they never saw that. Um, but then there's a little pieces, little quotes from them throughout where it's like, well, sort of they saw it.
Mhm.
So I can
Would it
go,
be would
yeah,
it
I
be
think the family
appropriate
saw it
to
more.
would it be appropriate to put, because I've seen in IEPs like parents report student has anxiety around math, right? Like whether or not they have a diagnosis or any paperwork. I feel like it's appropriate to be able to put that because there's that parent voice piece.
Yeah, definitely. And I don't know why the district didn't initiate an eval in the area of social emotional at some point too. Um, if this was a constant concern of the parents way before the IEE process.
Yeah, I
So
was gonna say, especially if parents are asking for it and are concerned
yeah,
about that anxiety piece.
and I wonder
I
if the first response of the district was, "Oh, you want him to have math? Great, we'll switch him to the math cohort, and he can be in the math cohort." And then if it was, "No, don't move him because he has anxiety and we don't want to make a thing about it, so just leave it," right? Like, because that just seems like an easy switch during that time.
You have to imagine I mean, probably a decent sized school district this cannot be the only case of this happening with those other students, right? Like if you have students with disabilities in any even moderately sized district and you're moving to like a 3 by 3 cohort, which I just still cannot believe I didn't make the connections during COVID, like duh. Then you're limiting access to this stuff that these kids need are required by law to be getting. And so this cannot be the only one. Now, not that I'm going to ask you to fix all the district's problems during COVID, because like if someone had the answer to that, then it would have been done. But Darcy, is that the right move? Oh, we just need to take into account our students with disabilities and where they're identified and just, I mean, that sounds like a scheduling nightmare. Just like, oh, just put this kid here, put this kid there. I mean, I know
Oh, it's
districts are doing,
definitely a scheduling nightmare. I have no qualms about that. But if you blanket an emergency response to a 3 by 3 schedule, you're gonna get these that happen. Like it's just gonna happen. So when it comes to your attention, I think it's then where you go, well, let's get the IEP team together and decide what to do.
hmm,
Because you're always gonna battle a BEA schedule.
Yeah, this case made me go back and forth a lot. Like there wasn't a clear like somebody was in the wrong or I mean the school made a couple mistakes. I also felt like there's a lot of not being super reasonable on the side of the parents with as much as they wanted the school to do for their students' anxiety that really wasn't showing up at school as much as it was showing up at home. And it felt kind of like they wanted the Cadillac. You know, we talk about that, which I don't love that term at all, but it's thrown around so much. Um, they
They
really
wanted
wanted
more
their,
than Andrew.
I think so. I think they wanted their student to be, you know, maybe going into a math career later on in life or something and be above the curve. His grades in school were pretty decent as well. Um, there were lots of reasons to think that this student wouldn't be at the top of your list of your must repair this relationship, must fix this student's program in special ed
hmm.
because it's a math calculation disability. um, I'm sure we have lots of side notes to say, tangents to go on about that, but
I do.
I don't know how you say it. Okay, you know, politically correct, but due process can be overused in special ed too,
Yeah.
to the point of wasting a lot of time and resources that could be put towards better places.
Yeah. Well,
It's very
and
frustrating.
I don't feel out of place saying this because I say it to them all the time, but one of the differences I see between like my job and my counterparts in the west side of the state is they're a lot more gun shy about getting like a lawsuit brought against them because I think it happens to them a lot,
Mhm.
you know.
Yeah.
I might have even said that before in a previous episode. It yeah, you hear about it happening around here, and like, um, oftentimes it's, I mean, used to advocate for kids when things are, I mean, all the cases we've talked about have been services and things that either aren't being delivered appropriately or just a means to an end, or like it's really a Swiss Army knife. Uh, but I wonder if it has a tendency to happen in districts that are more on the west side because you're dealing with parents that have access to more. I'll use wealth in the terms of non-monetary wealth, resources, right? Resources to either legal support or a network of people who are in the know. One thing that's been just real jarring about having our own kid in school is just the complexity from an outsider's point of view of navigating a school system. And so a way to look at wealth is like, do you know people in the school system that can help you navigate that? And do you know what opportunities and access and things you have access to? And that could potentially lead to a uh, overzealous use of the due process to
But I think
advocate
this
for your
is
kids.
probably a highly litigious district. They're
Mhm.
probably used to due processes.
Yeah.
And I think that they fell on that bias that you're coming to me and oh now you're like I can hear kind of the story, right? Like
I mean,
That
we do discuss cases where like kids are really having learning loss or
yeah.
being, removed from their learning. This is not one of those.
It's well, and it's so hard to, like, what is that? COVID shocked the entire world, right? Like there was
Mhm.
not a necessarily a right or a wrong way to do it because we couldn't have planned for that to happen, especially to the severity that it did. But like, how do you, as a family, as an educator, like recognize giving districts and families alike a benefit of the doubt of like, this is just a really bad time. Like, no one's making the progress they should be making because school's not the way it should be. And we just need to like give everyone a little grace. And then where's that line of like, okay, now you need to be back as a school giving my kids what they deserve. Not, I mean, they should always get what they deserve, but you guys know what I mean. Like, where's that? There wasn't like a specific date where it was like, okay, school needs to be back fully functioning. I mean that's so hard as like a family to think about of like where how much of that grace period should stay or when does it end or I mean all of those conversations it's so hard. It's like I think it's awesome of families to fight for their kids and what they should be getting. And COVID messed everybody up.
Yeah,
Well,
and I want to know comparison to peers, everybody regressed during COVID. So I don't think it would be, I mean, I can't say everybody, but it would not be unexpected to see a student's math scores go down when they only had it 3 by 3 for a year on Zoom. And then um, I think actually the next year it was more a lack of taking grade data, but they are comparing it with this private one-on-one tutoring and how that progress went way up. That's very different. I don't think you can compare those two settings
that's
at
the
all.
power of individualized, personalized education now, isn't it? When it also makes me think, and what you said makes me think of something Darcy mentioned earlier, which was makes us I can't think of it exactly, but it's something about the way we communicate with our communities and um the way we kind of tell our story a little bit and I think that's the it's hard to maintain a relationship with your community as a school district, I think, right? Because there's a lot of people who
Mhm.
think they know what's going on because they went to school, and they've got opinions on education because they have a vested interest in it. And it is a ideally publicly funded institution that, should work for the community. But we've talked a lot and often about the value that districts provide for the community. And if those things aren't made apparent, I think it can get pretty tricky. And so my guess would be nothing to back this up. My guess would be the districts that have a transparent, good relationship, trusting relationship with their community are the ones that probably didn't suffer quite as much during COVID. That's not an absolute, obviously, but if you as a community member, you're going to give your district a whole lot more grace if they have a history of doing a lot of things that honestly you three have talked about. Every time we say like, what should the district have done here? Your knee-jerk reaction is something like, oh, this is the way I'd start with a phone call to the family. It makes me think of one of the previous episodes we put out about, do you remember the little boy on the bus during the snowstorm?
Mhm.
And like they were trying to give him a ride home, and I was like, well, what do you even do? Like how do you respond to this as an administrator? And Darcy, you said I'd be calling that family and saying, look, we screwed up, and like here's how we're going to make it right. And that goes a long, long, long way for the community. And so uh
But I think some people and like again, I think this partially with my conversations with my counterparts on the West Side, some people are afraid to apologize because then they're admitting fault. And
Yeah.
then it's like, bring on the lawsuit because I've already told you we messed up.
so
I
you
think
never
that that's
apologize to a
my
cop and you get pulled over.
that's my one of my takeaways from this is that like being we need another system, right?
Mhm.
Like we have ways where you can have a facilitated IEP or some of those other things, and they're utilized. I don't know in comparison to due process, but I think we really need like what we do with with kids, we tell admins, let's do some restorative practices. Like, let's
Mm.
rebuild this relationship. And if we're talking about somebody who's not going to call and apologize when we know, right? Like that family was not nearly as upset about the fact that there was regression as they were that the district like put the stopgap and said, no, not our problem, it's your problem,
Mm.
right? Like they made it an us versus them instead of saying, yeah, we really didn't think about him being anxious every time he has to go to math. Right. And I
Yeah.
think there needs to be some restorative in that because now this family and this student who's in, I think you said sixth grade, what's
Well,
he
now
got?
he's a junior. Yeah.
Six
A
more
junior by
years
the time
of
this would
school
happen.
where the family's at home going, that school, this teacher, right? I mean, that's what's left in our community of the devastation from a due process. And I wish that there was a better way or system and structure where there had to be some restorative piece in that, not just the judge had handing down a sentence of this is what you need to do to fix it, because that's not going to fix it.
Right.
I think a takeaway that I have is, I mean, building on that is making sure that the parent voice is adequately represented in the IEP, like talking about the anxiety and the different the different pieces of that throughout, because this was a long drawn out conversation over years, and that's easy to have been documenting all along.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
not adding anything new here, but I think the power of relationships and open communication and keeping what's best for every student at the forefront of all of your decision making and honoring both parent and school voice in that.
I have to add one because I wouldn't have guessed that the court would have said the comprehensive eval.
Well, we haven't even gotten to the rest of the decisions. It's not good.
Oh,
Ooh.
Yeah.
We have to
So,
cut some of this and put it at the end. All right, go
yeah.
ahead.
So, I mean, I think this part was really interesting, but on one of the decision or one of, there's numbers 1 through 100 and something of things they discussed, but the judge said in the present case, the equities do not weigh strongly for or against the district or the parents. So I feel like this basically came down to procedural errors. Like we talked about, not talking about ESY, not honoring the anxiety conversation, not having good progress monitoring, potentially even predetermining the schedule and the services during COVID, which they couldn't actually adjudicate because it was 2 years past time. But the family ended up asking for tuition reimbursement of $10,668, which included travel costs
their
for
tuition,
break.
their tutoring's expensive.
Yeah, it was like 3 hours a day, and then during the summer too. And
He had
they
one-on-one for
were,
3 hours a day, and we're
I
surprised he
know,
made more progress.
I know, it's a hard case. It's a hard case because
Is that the
we
one? Did you just tell us he had 3 hours?
I didn't hear 3 hours before.
I said tutoring, and yeah, I just told you that. I'm
Like, I
saving
just
little.
think I granted our 6-year-old is real lofty, but like we can finish a worksheet that they had 30 minutes in class to do, right? As a group that he got half done. We finish it in 2 minutes when it's one-on-one instruction because there's so many variables in a classroom that are not there when you have one-on-one instruction. So like, of course people get through more faster when it's one-on-one.
Yeah, I know. It's a hard one. The parents also asked for comp ed and they were denied that. But honestly, I would have thought comp ed would have been better than paying for this private tutoring that I don't feel like. I'm surprised. Anyway, I'm going to say that. And I also agree that Shoreline's had other due process. They probably are well trained in how to not fall into these mistakes, but it was COVID and people were barely surviving. And we know that there's been a massive amount of turnover in special ed directors in our state and superintendents. And if you were to file a due process in any of our districts at any time, there would be a lot of problems found, I think. So that's also like, is this actually the way to fix a system? I mean,
So I think I have a question from
mhm.
all this. What is the, I guess, ideal line? Like, how do you hold districts accountable? Because we do need to be held accountable, right? Like, to a certain extent, there needs to be accountability for sure. And, um, I mean, I know we talk like what's the line if it's not a due process of holding districts accountable? I know like mediated meetings and those types of things. Is there another ideal option?
I mean, I feel like this was procedure, like I said, I mean, I don't know that they had a lot of like really it doesn't say that they had like a lot of tension at the IEP meetings. Sometimes you don't necessarily even know which family's going to come back and say 2 years ago you denied my student FAPE and I don't know,
I
that's
did. I don't
tough.
know, Leanne. I think you know. I
You
think every
might
director knows.
there might be some
They're never
surprises,
like,
but you do
"Oh my gosh, this
usually
isn't a
know. You're
shock."
right. In real life, you usually know. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like definitely. I think another piece to to that question, Anna, is anyone who files a due process is offered mediation. And to me, mediation is a much better option than letting
Mm.
the judge make a decision about a kid in situation that he knows nothing about other than a list of evidence of dates and paperwork.
So who
Um,
offers that mediation? Like when you file, you're offered it, or the district says, "Hey, let's do it."
yeah, so when you file, the district gets a certain amount of time to schedule a mediation. And, both parties have to be willing. And some families say no because they just want the judge to make that decision for them. But I think if you can work with a family through mediation, I mean, just it, like my experience is it turns out much better, right? Like
And why
who's
do
happy when a judge says 65 hours or whatever the situation? Both parties are unhappy. Well, of course, both
yeah.
parties are unhappy.
Why why then is there such a hesitation to offer that preemptively? Like, I mean, I've had that conversation with multiple people of like, why don't you try a mediated IEP? And it's like a no, 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 we can't go there. And I'm like, I feel like that's better than arguing like you're doing now. Cause and
Yeah.
I mean, I
Yeah.
went through a mediated IEP years ago and it was a lot. Like it was 3 full days of IEP meeting. It was exhausting, but the family didn't sue. And at the end of the day, we all agreed and compromised and moved forward.
I agree. And I think some people say no because it's a lot. Right? They're like, I'm not going to get subs for my teachers to be out. What are we going to do with the kid that needs the one-on-one? How do I get this right? Like just that process. And like if your conflict avoidance is really high, I don't want to sit in the room with people who are mad at me and have the conversation and maintain the relationship. I'd rather just go over there, make a decision. I'll eat my 65 hours and I'm good for some cheese and crackers. I would pick mediation or facilitated IEP
I was
every
gonna
time.
say it's not like it's just the 65 hours, the amount of time being deposed and all the other things, like
Ah,
it's not it's not without what, like a
And
month a
and
month
the
of time
Facebook
of
posts that are going around about your district and the arguments, right? Like there's all of that that
yeah.
goes into it too. And it's also now public perception, which draws on that mistrust in your community.
yeah.
Okay, I had to look back at
And
the 3 hours. It was 3 hours per week. I just have to clarify. not 3 hours per
Oh.
day.
Thank you.
Gosh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to stress everybody out.
Like,
But
yeah,
still,
it's a
3 hours
tutor.
a week of one-on-one math
That's
instruction
that's
would
still
do
really
a
good.
lot too.
Oh.
And
Yeah,
then
well, obviously
summer.
it did because he did really well with his tutoring. I think another piece of that time with due process is you never know what the ALJ is going to do,
Mm.
right? Like
Mhm.
I've been in one and they're like, this family's having a hard time putting their paperwork together. So they're going to bring you a box and you organize it for them. And then you submit it with the way you have to submit your own documentation. And I'm like, huh, so I'm putting together the case against me to send
Yeah.
to you? And yes, I
It
did.
seems like a
So you,
crazy ethical breach,
so
right?
you just never know what the judge is gonna do or how those things play out. So I don't know why you'd ever pick that option over the facilitated IEP or mediation.
And those are
But
free.
I also don't mind sitting in a room with people who disagree with me and trying to like maintain the relationship and find a way to, come out of it in the end. And I I don't know.
I was going to say,
But
Darcy does not
Yeah.
strike me as conflict averse.
no, she's not.
Darcy likes when people disagree with her.
Well,
I
and
do.
sometimes having the conflict up front, I mean, always is better than having it with attorneys. I mean, I would choose that every day. I I feel like this case was like the opposite of Andrew. Like, we were talking about bare minimus or whatever. Like making more than that amount of progress. It feels like this was the the top end of how much can a family ask for and get reimbursed for. And I don't love it. I don't love the way that this ended.
Hmm. So if you had one big takeaway from this, what would it be?
It's back to data. I mean, I think, and listening to parents when they come in, no matter what request they make, you must address it in, a legal documentation like a prior written notice. Err on the side of giving them an extra accommodation for anxiety. I mean, these are not battles worth fighting. Thanks for tuning in to Spedsplaining. If you've got questions or thoughts about today's episode, we'd love to hear from you. Head over to our links where you can drop your questions, join the conversation, and connect with us. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode if you found it helpful. Until next time, keep on learning and stay curious.